Yes, indeed, everyone. I'm doing yet another edition of What Went Wrong, a series of videos where I take a look at something from professional wrestling's history, evaluate how it was probably an idea that had merit, but ultimately did not live up to its full potential. And the topic of today's video is going to be something that actually happened very recently, within the last week. The two, I guess you could call them empty arena, free for all, no holds barred. Last man standing in one case, matches between Edge and Randy Orton, and Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa on this week's NXT. Two matches that didn't really do it for me. The reaction to them seems to be somewhat split. Some people really love them and consider them to be modern classics. Some people said that they went on too long and were self-indulgent, were awful. And I'm going to evaluate why I'm not extremely negative, but I wasn't very positive towards them either, and I'm going to evaluate why that is. But before I jump into that, I wanted to cover something that happened earlier today, where it was announced that a WWE employee has tested positive for COVID-19, and yet they are still planning to, run their shows. They are still planning to put new material out there for Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. And I think at this point, it's like, look, AEW filmed a shitload of material so they can just do tape shows for at least a while. We'll see how long that can carry them, but all the other indies have shut down, basically, and postponed their shows, and Impact Wrestling had, like, their TNA reunion show coming up, and they've got another pay-per-view, I think it's called Rebellion, and both of those are going to have to be, well, one was already postponed, I believe the other show is going to be postponed as well, and, the Nick Aldis, Marty Scurll Crockett Cup show, that had to be postponed, which that one I'm super disappointed about because of the, I was really digging the program and the build up to that, and I was really excited for it. I was totally going to watch it, and that got postponed. So we've lost a lot as wrestling fans to this whole situation, but it is the current situation. I think at this point, you got past WrestleMania. For better or worse, you put on WrestleMania. I say it's time to kind of scale back, shut down operations, and just resume when we've moved past this. Because at this point, I think the wrestlers are kind of being endangered at this point. So, they encourage social distancing for a reason, and good for Roman Reigns for getting ahead of it, I guess. But it's yeah, and I get that Vince McMahon is a stubborn son of a bitch. And that's just the way Vince's brain is wired, and I can kind of understand it to a certain degree, because I hate it. I hate it when I've got something planned and there's something I need to do, and I can't do it. It just sticks in my craw like a motherfucker. So I understand, like, Vince's mindset. It's like, I gotta do something. And, I also heard the news that the XFL has apparently been shut down with no plans to return in 2021, which I actually think is a damn shame, because I'm not saying this new incarnation of the XFL was great, but it was a simple, fun thing that people could enjoy, and people were starting to dig it, and I was even having, like, some fun with it. It's, again, I'm not saying it's, like, as good as the NFL or anything like that, but as, like, a spring league, I think it could have been a solid addition to the sports schedule, and at this point, like, with COVID-19, like, ruining everything, it's like, dude, I miss the XFL, because it was nice to have sports, and now we don't have sports, but I'm sure Vince is super, super pissed off about that, and I think it sucks. Like, the XFL got killed again by things that were completely out of Vince's control, and I think that's more than anything what's pissing Vince off, is that it's all of this is out of his control, and with everything I've heard about Vince, he doesn't like it when things aren't in his control. But I think at this point, it's time to just kind of throw in the towel and just be like, come on, just... And, the WWE has so much material anyway. You can do best of shows. Like, you can do something. You can cobble together something to air on Monday or SmackDown. And I think extenuating circumstances, people are probably not going to watch in droves, because, the ratings across the board are just going down, because it's like... I think most people are just watching the news at this point, because it's like they want to get updates on what to do, what's going on, what's the situation. They're waiting desperately for that announcement that we can go outside again. And I mean, the only times I've gone outside are for groceries, gas, and to drop something off at the bank, deposit a check, and it's a very boring existence. But I'd rather be doing that and ensure that we get past this safely than to keep on doing things as normal and endanger a bunch of people. So it's I can understand the frustration on Vince's part, but I also think now's the time to kind of like throw in the towel. And it's like, dude, just the world's working against it. The fact that you pulled off WrestleMania to some degree, and it wasn't it wasn't my cup of tea necessarily, but it also wasn't like a complete shit show. Is I mean, kudos to you for that, but it's like, dude, you made it past WrestleMania, you can stop now, and I think I think everything would be fine. But anywho, so I just wanted to put that little disclaimer up there and talk about that, and just my 2 cents throwing for what that's worth. Throwing advice to Vince and the WWE. It's like, look, I know it sucks. This all sucks. Everyone's being hurt by this. It's time to stop. Like, no, seriously, dude, it's really time to stop. But now it's time to get into this edition of What Went Wrong. I haven't done one of these in a while, like I said. It's a series that's irregular. I just kind of do it when I get a spark to do it. And I get like an idea in my head. It's like, all right, what's one that would work? What would be a good topic for something like this? And it's actually, now that I think about it, having seen Dark Side of the Ring, it's like, Brawl for All would have been great for this. But now it's like, what's the point? I've already done a video about it. Dark Side of the Ring already covered it. It would be completely pointless for me to do a video. But I wish I had thought about it. It's like, yeah, the Brawl for All would have been a good one for this. But anyway... what went wrong? Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on Edge versus Randy Orton at this past WrestleMania, Night 2, WrestleMania 36, and the Tommaso Ciampa Johnny Gargano match from this week's NXT. Now, let me start off by saying that just because I wasn't the biggest fan of these matches doesn't mean that it's like a fuck WWE or anything like that. I think part of the reason these matches turned out the way they did is because of the situation that we're in. Obviously, the empty arena aspect is a huge component of that. But there's also, I think they're just struggling to fill material. I think they're just struggling to find a way to get something on the airwaves to kind of fill the time that they feel that they should have. So, NXT is a 2-hour show. Well, fuck it. We'll just have Gargano and Ciampa go out there, and that'll take up an hour of the show. And that's an hour we don't have to worry about. So, something like that, and I'm kind of like thinking about back when I was watching Mystery Science Theater back in the day. And I've seen interviews with the people that worked on that show, and they were like, yeah, one of the reasons we got picked up by Comedy Central initially is because we were long. And in its infancy, Comedy Central was just looking for any way they could fill 24 hours of airtime. And Mystery Science Theater, because every episode is a movie, basically, every episode is a 2-hour show. So it's like, oh, great. That's 2 hours a week we don't have to worry about. And you put on this show that gains a cult following and everything else, and it's great, and everyone's happy. So I think the match is turning out as long as they did. Is largely because they were just struggling to fill airtime on these long-ish shows that they needed to fill airtime for. That said, the length is also the main thing that went wrong with these. I think that's the major thing, is like why these things were so hard to watch and why they didn't play as well on TV as I think they probably thought they would while they were filming it. And I think Gargano and Ciampa turned out a little better than Edge and Orton did, but not by much. And Edge and Orton, I mean, that match, I tried not to judge WrestleMania too harshly because it was a product of the situation surrounding everything. So somebody asked me, did you think WrestleMania 36 was the worst WrestleMania of all time? And I'm like, I feel like that would be unfair to call it that, because it was it was a WrestleMania that was born out of a tough situation. They did the best they could. So I can't judge it. I didn't assign a letter grade to it. If you noticed my video, I didn't put like a little review grade in the description, because it's like, I almost feel like it's above being reviewed. Like, what's the point? It's just kind of like, this is the WrestleMania we get when we're all in quarantine. And which is why I'm trying not to be too hard on the performers and the matches themselves, because once again, I think that the situation is why these matches were made, but the matches still didn't work for me, and I felt so bad for Edge, because this was supposed to be his grand return, and it got yanked right out from under him, and what we got was this boring, plotting match that just would not fucking end. And Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano, longest running feud in NXT history, longest running feud WWE in the last 2 decades, I think. something like that. And they've gotten like what 3-4 years out of this. It just seems like this feud that just keeps evolving and keeps on going, keeps on trucking. Um, and they ended up having to have their big burn-off match in an empty arena, which I'm not convinced is the burn-off match, even though they said it was. But we'll get there when we get there. But so these are two matches that probably coulda, shoulda been like the best match of their respective shows, Takeover Tampa and WrestleMania, and that just didn't happen because of all this shit. So, but while watching these matches, especially Edge and Orton, it's 40 some odd minutes, or like 35 to 40, somewhere in that range, of two guys going around an empty building and beating each other and hitting each other with weapons and ramming each other into hard objects, and anything that wasn't nailed down was used as a weapon. And when you have a match that goes that long with no rules and weapons are encouraged and you're just smacking each other with everything that isn't nailed down, and it goes that long, and it puts in my head, like, it takes me out of it after a while, and I'm just like, okay, you're hitting each other, it's no DQs, hard surfaces everywhere, you're throwing each other into every wall that's around, yet there's no blood, no serious injury, and after 30 minutes you're still fighting as hard as you were 30 minutes ago, and I'm just like, okay, so you're not really hurting each other, and it kind of takes me out of it. I'm firm believer that matches like this need color. That was actually, going back to the first Ciampa Gargano match, I was like, that match was fabulous, but at the same time, I was like, the one thing it was missing, that was a match that absolutely needed color and didn't have it. Because of WWE's current rule structure, they can't have color. And it's like, it's unfortunate, but it's like, God, that match really needed color. And I think matches like this, which are supposed to be so intense that they have to be held in an empty building or whatever, which that's not the reason that they were held in an empty building. They were held in an empty building because they had to be. But it was it just kind of highlights the kind of the work aspect, at least for me, where it's like I can't get into it as like any kind of a real fight because it just feels like it feels super staged. And we could talk about like the more cinematic fights, like the Boneyard match and the Firefly Funhouse match, which I have a hard time even calling that one a match. But that's like a different discussion entirely. And we can talk about whether or not, like, I'll be honest, I had an easier time getting into AJ and Undertaker than I did these two matches right here. Because I think as far as presenting that style, I guess you would call it, AJ and Undertaker actually kind of worked for me. These two, it's just... Again, they were overly long, and I wasn't convinced they were actually fighting each other after a while, because they were kind of going for like a real gritty, realistic fight, but it just, the longer they went, the less convinced I was that they were actually fighting each other. And that's... and what I'm describing, you could probably say is a criticism of a lot of no DQ hardcore style matches in the last like 20 years, going all the way back to ECW when they were in their prime, where a lot of those matches kind of get away with it, and there have been plenty of examples of like no DQ style matches where I'm like, okay, this is getting silly. The one that sticks out to me for some reason, it's another Edge match. It was Edge and John Cena, a last man standing match, and Edge hit the one-man concerto on Cena, and Cena still beat the 10 count. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, what is this? And it completely took me out of it. But where a lot of those matches kind of get away with a lot of that stuff is that there's still a crowd there watching it. And I've talked about it before, how not having a crowd for any kind of wrestling match, it makes it harder for me to get into it because... the wrestlers don't have that energy to feed off of, and you don't get that roller coaster of emotion style reaction. You can't get a sense if something is working or not working with the audience. I mean, even in the Rocky movies, like having an audience there watching the boxing matches or any kind of real sport, watching these sports unfold, like the crowd just makes such a difference towards the enjoyment of it, and having fun with it. I mean, even Rocky 5, they knew with the street fight, it's like, all right, but we got to have spectators all over the place reacting to this shit. So, there's that going on as well. And you don't really have that here in either of these fights, so it just feels... the length is definitely felt because of that. and it makes it harder for me to accept kind of the fantasy elements. And it just kind of looks more staged without it. And so it's like the length is a problem, and the lack of a crowd is definitely a problem. I think the cinematic fights kind of get around that by having like music and fancy editing to kind of make it look more like a movie. And that's where AJ and Undertaker kind of got away with a lot of things a little bit. It made it easier to watch. Whereas Gargano and Ciampa and Edge and Orton, it was just super awkward and really dragged. Like really dragged. I don't think it's a reflection on Edge or Orton or Ciampa or Gargano as performers. I actually quite like those guys. I think that's why not that I'm putting anybody down, but I think one of the reasons there are people that like those matches, I'm like, I feel like you like them because of who's in it. And I feel like if Triple H was in one of these matches, we'd be bashing it a lot more. But, I mean, I joked, like, oh, so I guess the Triple H match at this year's WrestleMania is going to be taken by Edge and Orton. It's, like, overly long, boring, and I guess you could say self-indulgent. I've seen that criticism thrown around where matches like this are very self-indulgent, where they just kind of, like, go as long as they want and do everything they possibly can to each other just to show that they can do it without much care for anything else. And whether or not it makes the story more cohesive. And for some reason, when I hear that, I think of the last Muppet movie, Muppets Most Wanted, where the evil Kermit takes over the Muppets and they don't know that Kermit's evil doppelganger was switched in. And he basically tells them while putting the show together, it's like, oh, just do what you want. And, you know, the band takes solos that go way too long, and Miss Piggy goes too long, and all these other things. And what you end up with is a show that's basically unwatchable as everybody tries to show off and go as long as they want. And so there is something to be said for, it's like, you know, brevity is the soul of wit, or whatever that saying is. And it's better to tell a more concise, cohesive story than it is to, like, prove that you can do everything under the sun. But again, I think the length of these matches isn't so much self-indulgence as it is, fuck, we've just got to fill the time. We just have to fill the time. And we can get, you guys can probably do it. It won't be a complete disaster. And I think that was a lot of the mindset of it. But other problems that showed up, I think in Edge and Orton's case, the last man standing gimmick made it even more awkward because you constantly have the referee counting, and it really fell into that trap that some last man standing matches fall into, where it's do a spot, count to 10, do a spot, count to 10, do a spot, count to 10. It just feels very repetitive, and it makes the match feel longer than it probably should be. Or it makes the match feel longer than it probably is. Although Edge and Orton, when I heard it was 36 minutes, I'm like, oh my god, it felt so much longer than that. I was like, it was only 36? I thought it was closer to an hour. I was like, shit. And then Gargano and Ciampa, I think some of the problems, it fell into kind of like, what's the word? I don't want to say indie-rific, but they did some spots there that I felt should have been the finish, like when they did that fall off the top turnbuckle onto the floor. I felt like that probably should have been close to the finish. And they were, when they went on top of the production truck, which that was another thing, because Edge and Orton had done a similar spot, it just kind of felt like it was retreading off of something that we just saw less than a week ago. I don't know which match was filmed first, but it was, it felt very repetitive. But if you're going to go out to the production truck, maybe you should have ended with the production truck, ended out there maybe. But instead it kind of ended with that weird bit with Candice LeRae where she kicked Johnny in the balls to trick Ciampa so she could sneak up on him and kick him in the balls. I'm like, you know, you probably could have just kicked him first, and it would have been more simple, I think. And, you know, get to the point. Get to the point a little bit quicker. The way they did it was a little clunky for me and didn't really work. And because she did that, it made me think, it's like, okay, so this isn't over yet. And it's, you know, this was billed as the final chapter of Ciampa and Gargano, and it doesn't feel like that it's going to be. And it's sad, because I really feel like they were probably going to give them Hell in a Cell for the first Hell in a Cell match in TakeOver history. I can't confirm that. That's just me speculating, but it really felt like they were getting to that point where, oh my god, we have a feud that actually warrants Hell in a Cell. And granted, I have my problems with this feud. Johnny Gargano does not work as a heel for me. I'm sorry. It's just, I'm not really digging it. I can buy Ciampa as like a badass Austin-style babyface, but I can't buy Gargano as a heel. I don't see it. I don't think it's a natural casting for him, which is another aspect of this where it's like, not really feeling the Gargano heel turn. I didn't like it when they did it the first time, where he beat up Aleister Black, and people completely forgot about that. But it's yeah. So, but I think a Hell in a Cell match between the two would have worked great if that's where they were going with it. Unfortunately, we just kind of got this, which took up an entire hour of a 2-hour show. But again, I think a lot of that was done just to fill the time. And but there are other ways to do that. Now, because I'm saying all of this, wasn't a huge fan of Edge and Orton, wasn't a huge fan of Ciampa and Gargano. AEW next week has already announced and filmed a empty arena match between Jon Moxley and Jake Hager for the title, and I am scared to death as to what they filmed for that one, because it's like, oh god, if we get another long and boring empty arena match, I'm gonna lose my shit. And I'm like, I'll just say this, like, guys, I know you've already filmed it, but Jesus Christ, if you filmed an hour's worth of material, please, dear God Almighty, please cut it in half, at least. Shorten that shit considerably. Because it's AEW, I feel like, and because it's Jon Moxley and he's a crazy bastard, they're gonna have blood, which that'll help and sell, like, the real grittiness of whatever it is they're trying to do. But if this thing goes for an hour, I swear to God, I'm like, oh my God, why? Don't do this. It's gonna be lousy. So it's like, editing is your friend. And if you look back in WWE's history, they've done things like this before that kind of worked. The prime example for me, and one that I've talked about quite a bit, it's Roddy Piper and Goldust at WrestleMania 12, the Hollywood Backlot Brawl, which was a match that was separated into two halves, and the second half was held in front of an arena, and it's one of the best parts of that show. I think it came off amazingly well. But the first part, they just go to the back lot, they have their fight, there's some spectators watching, but essentially it's empty arena. And that whole section, it didn't go long, it only lasted, I think 5 minutes, I want to say. It wasn't that long. But you really felt like Goldust and Piper, especially Piper on Goldust, that they were beating the shit out of each other that whole time. And when Goldust hit Roddy Piper with the car, I was like, I remember watching it at that point as a kid. How old would I have been? I would have been 11 at that point. I remember thinking, it's like, okay, I know this isn't real, but how'd they do that? Apparently Goldust just straight up hit him with the car, and Piper knew how to take the bump, for lack of a better term. But, I mean, that match looks really, really good. The only negative I have to say about that entire match is the OJ Bronco footage that they inserted into it, which is cringy as all hell. But other than that, the match works beautifully to me. And I was like, dude, that looked like they were legit trying to beat the shit out of each other. And didn't go too long, sold the brutality, and it felt raw, and it felt nasty. And that's something that these other two didn't really completely catch. Or Gargano Ciampa more so than Edge and Orton, but not entirely. And again, it went so long that any kind of like brutality it was trying to sell just kind of faded away by the end of it. So yeah, so Piper Goldust should be the gold standard of like empty arena brawls, I think, because it was really well done. And even like Rock and Mankind, which that was just a dog and pony show, basically, where they were just going around the arena and just having a hoot. That match was well done for what it was, and they knew they had to keep it short because it was only going to be something that was watched during the Super Bowl halftime show. And that came off well, I thought. It came off well enough, and it was fun. I know people hate that shot of the forklift coming down on the Rock, and some people said it ruined the whole match. I'm like, it's a bad shot, but I wouldn't say it ruined the entire match. But again, at least it was shorter. And if you want to watch The Rock do shtick for 10, 15 minutes, however long it was, it's like it's good for that. So that's another one that kind of worked. But Edge and Orton and Gargano Ciampa, not really my cup of tea, and I'm scared to death to what AEW is going to do with Hager and Moxley. And again, editing is your friend. It's okay to cut it down. If you filmed an hour's worth of material, You have commercial breaks. You have ways to shorten it. So please, I'm begging you. I am begging you. Please do not go long with this thing. So I think that's enough. I think I've talked enough about it. And as I'm filming this, it's actually past midnight. So it is now Easter. So happy Easter, everybody. I hope we all try to have fun. If you have kids, I hope you find some way to do an Easter egg hunt. In the midst of all of this. And I'm proud of myself. Even with the quarantine, I'm sure a lot of Catholics just gave up on Lent because it's like, fuck it, we're giving up enough as it is. I held up to my Lenten promises. For Lent this year, I gave up. I felt like I was drinking too much coffee, and I shortened it as like, okay, I will only have 1 cup of coffee a day. And that's 1 in the morning, and then that's it. And which is actually harder than it sounds when you're a coffee drinker, because, 2 in the afternoon rolls around and you're just really feeling tired. It's like, God, I need a boost. It's like, nope. But I held on to that Lenten promise all the way. I didn't eat meat on Fridays all of Lent, despite all of this, and we're sacrificing enough. I actually made it. I held through. But it's past midnight now, so I think I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Fuck it. I made it. But yeah, so enjoy Easter as much as you possibly can. I'll have more videos lined up. I'm actually currently working on editing another video together that's going to be non-wrestling related. I think the shirt kind of gives it away as to what it's going to be. But that one's going to take me a couple weeks to work on, so it's not going to be immediate. But you will be seeing me in this shirt because I just filmed a part of it right before I started filming this. So, but yeah, I think I've talked enough. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. And I've got to do more What Went Wrongs because I think this is a fun series and I enjoy doing it. But that is all I have here. Happy Easter, everybody, and I will see you all later.